Catholic Church's belief on evolution versus creation. As far as books, one of them, this is an old book, but it's pretty good. The original was called Why Colleges Breed Communists, but it's The Evolution Hoax Exposed. And then this is, basic. That's good. I like this book because it's called Heretic, but it's written by a professor in Finland who really was strong in evolution, and then he started doing his homework, and then he proved that the scientific evidence goes completely the other way. And then he has an interesting thing in here. There was a book, a biography about Stalin, and this is what Stalin, one of his friends, said, I began to speak of God. Joseph, in other words, Joseph Stalin, heard me out, and after a moment's silence said, they are fooling us. There is no God. I was astonished at these words. I never heard anything like it before. So Stalin was saying there is no God. And then how can you say such things? I'll lend you a book to read. It'll show you that the world and all living things are quite different from what you imagine. And all this talk about God is sheer nonsense. What book is that? I inquired. Darwin, you must read it. Joseph impressed on me. So a lot of people have lost their faith because of this. So this is an interesting book. Okay, then there's Stephen C. Myers. I met him in Spokane. He's in Seattle with the Discovery Institute. And then they've got DVDs and books, all kinds of things. But scientific proof that there's about creation. And I was on a flight from Burbank to somewhere to Burbank, and sitting next to a lawyer, and she was Catholic, and then she was an atheist, and her husband's an atheist. And I said, what kind of proof do you need to prove there is a God? Okay, then she said, disprove evolution. So anyway, I had this huge book by, Stephen Meyer wrote an excellent book about DNA and about microbiology and other things, and it's just all facts. So I said, I'll send you a book, and then write back if you have any questions about believing in God. So she never wrote back. Friedrich Engels in 1859 wrote to Karl Marx. Incidentally, Darwin, whom I'm just reading, is absolutely splendid. Because think about that, before Darwin came out with this theory, there's two explanations for the existence of the universe. God created it, or I don't know. Right? Those were the only alternatives, one or the other. So he said, one bastion of theology was still unbreached. Now it has fallen. Karl Marx replied a month later, I've read Darwin's book during the last 4 weeks. Although set out in the clumsy English style, this is a book that will provide the natural history basis for our work. So that's the basis of communism. If we're just animals, then the state has supreme control. And then we'll talk about some of the other things that go with it. So the best scientific evidence supports true theology. There's not one thing positively known scientifically about evolution. There's not one fact of it. So when you look at scientific method, think about this, because they just bypass all this. The first, you start out, you observe something and you question it, and then you do research and you come out with a hypothesis, right? And then you test it, and then you got to analyze it, right, after the test. Then you draw a conclusion, and then you share it with others. But with evolution, they skipped many of these steps, most of the steps. But here's why it's so important. Because if we're just animals, and then especially with evolution, then you deny original sin. Because there was no Adam and Eve. They were just some monkeys evolved. And then you can't explain sin or evil. So there's just to do what you please, as long as you don't get. And then with, so God, we have to believe de fide, divine and Catholic faith, that God created the universe, God created the world, and that the human soul is a direct creation of God. it's hard to find how are you going to put evolution into that. It doesn't work. And then also, with evolution, how can you explain male and female genders? And then since living things have instinct or intelligence, right? Even insects have instinct. Right? This must come from an information source. In other words, somebody that programmed them and told them how to do it. So where did they get this information from? So it's really a challenge of ideas. There's two different views, worldviews. There's a religious view where we believe there's a God and then we base our life on His laws, and then our destiny, eternity, and then we're secularism. So we're either a creature, a child of God, or we're just matter. If we're just matter, then euthanasia is okay, abortion's okay, etc. And then today there's all this political correctness in teaching science, but it doesn't go through the scientific method. It's just, okay, you get all these grants, you get all this money for teaching, because this is what it goes politically correct. And even, okay, and then, but they won't accept alternatives. In other words, it's not like you're scientific, okay, where you're looking, okay, let's look at this and this, compare, and look at the evidence. No, it's just, they won't accept where you're gathering information, analyzing, drawing a conclusion or something like that. It just, this is the point of view you must accept. So it's a war of militant atheism to defend Darwinism and attack religion. So it's not about, it's just science. It's not between science and religion. There's no contradiction between science and true religion. But it's a conflict in worldviews, either a religious worldview or a totally secular worldview where we're just matter. And then, but again, true science can't ever contradict the true religion. And then, okay, evolutionists can talk about the survival of the fittest, but not about the origin. So, and some people say, okay, there's scientists that believe in evolution. Okay, there are distinguished scientists who don't believe in evolution. So all scientists don't, believe in evolution. But belief in God makes it easier to do science. Because I mean, think about biology. We're talking about God's creation. Astronomy, biology, chemistry, physics, right? We're talking about God's laws and then things, His creation, right? So, but Darwinism leads to atheism, so there's no ethics. And then religion becomes just a fairy tale or primitive superstition. It doesn't affect their lives, it's just fantasy. But here's the last thing. Natural selection ties in with abortion. And then euthanasia, it's the same lies. You don't have quality of life, so they just kill you. And then somebody else determines who's fit to live and who's not fit to live. It's because we're just killing an animal, right? Superior animal. Here's what Pope Pius XII said. The literal historical sense of the first three chapters of Genesis, again about creation, cannot be doubted where there's a question of facts narrated in those same chapters which touch on the foundation of the Christian religion, such as, among others, the peculiar creation of man, the formation of the first woman from the first man, etc. And then he says the first 11 chapters of Genesis pertain to history in the true sense. So we don't know the specific details how man's body was formed. We know that man was one of the masterpieces of God's creation, and his soul was a special creation of God. From the words of Genesis, theologians infer that Adam's body was also a special and unique creation because it wasn't drawn from the sea or the land or anything like that. God breathed the soul into Adam, which is not mentioned in the other creations. Like the birds, he didn't breathe the soul into the birds. You don't read that. And he was made to the image and likeness of God. The theory of evolution formulated by atheists and agnostics denies the existence of God and the special creation of the human soul by God. They formulate an erroneous concept of evolution as an alternative to the Genesis account and teach that the universe was the result of very fortunate chance occurrences and deny that God is responsible. They also deny that God designed the world. But anyway, here's what it says. the best scientific evidence supports true theology. The simplest, okay, so Darwin started with a living cell. There was life, and then everything evolved after it. But if there is no God and there isn't creation, then if there was a time when nothing ever existed, then nothing could exist. Because there's no, right? Because there's nothing, you can't change it. But if God existed, then he can do something, and he has infinite power. So here's what it says. So Darwin's theory doesn't even begin until the first living cell exists. But where did the first living cell come from? So let's think about the first living cell. The simplest form of life, okay, I know maybe it's even below amoeba. Okay, let's just think some really tiny form of life. Very simple. That requires at least 250 perfectly aligned proteins to function. What's so difficult about that? Dr. Doug Axe, a molecular biologist, replies, we're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable. Roughly 1 in a trillion. And then Dr. Gerald Schroeder at the Hebrew University said the number is essentially 0. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work. But again, this isn't for science, but that's what they're trying to do. They're saying, okay, if you believe in God, you're not scientific, so you're the enemy. And if you believe in evolution, okay, then you're with the program. So it's, but it's a war between. Go ahead.
Talking about evolution, on Wednesday, I have a wedding. That's last Wednesday. There's many people, people are Catholic, no Catholic, some people don't believe in anything. And one young boy came to me, he says, I have a question for you. Yes, what is this? Well, I don't belong to any religion. I am zero in this, so I don't believe in anything. But tell me, why, when I do something wrong, I feel guilty? Doesn't come from evolution, this feeling. Why I feel guilty? Well, Chuck, this is a very great opportunity to preach God, the Creator, and how original sin happened, that disordering our nature. Obviously, we know that when we commit something wrong or sin, evil. So, talking about evolution. So, if God doesn't exist, if we come from little fish, this doesn't make sense that I feel guilty when I committed something evil. It's interesting.